expand our imagination.
Justification for being what it was.
And welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plant. The past few days in Washington have been a time to mend fences between President Obama and Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai. Remember the nasty public back and forth a month ago? Frustrated administration officials were trashing Karzai and his government, and Karzai retaliated. He threatened to join the Taliban. The White House hinted that it was thinking about canceling his visit. But since then, things have cooled down, and the stage managing of the Karzai visit was all about showing that the two sides are now cooperating, even though there do continue to be issues which stand in the way. Zalmay Khalilzad is a former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan and Iraq, now a counselor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And, Mr. Ambassador, I'm very glad that you could join us today.
Well, it's great to be with you.
You ought to be able to shed some light on this. I mean, what happened here? The United States and its partner in Afghanistan really had a rough patch.
Well, they did. I think both came to a judgment a little while back, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that things had gone too far. I know that the Afghan people were worried about President Karzai's hostile statements, thinking that without support from the United States, their country cannot succeed. And I think that had a good disciplining effect on President Karzai. I think here, too, the U.S. military and others came to a judgment that that for the U.S. to succeed, for the president's strategy to succeed in Afghanistan, they need the cooperation of President Karzai, that working around them or undermining him or saying working with local leaders or with his ministers without working with them were all unrealistic, and they risked Karzai being completely alienated or doing something unexpected. So I think they thought an attempt ought to be made to turn a new page.
Well, they put on quite a display of unity at the White House
yes,
and at the State Department, but I think the problem at bottom is they still don't trust him, yes?
Well, I think the key issue is whether the president spending some time with him. I don't think President Obama had spent much time with President Karzai before. He's not a touchy-feely guy in any case, President Obama, unlike President Bush, who spent an enormous amount of time with both Prime Minister Maliki and President Karzai. But I think yesterday they did spend some time together, including some time alone, just the two of them. Hopefully, some degree of understanding leading to trust might have started to be established. That's critical. That's the first step. But there are then real issues on which there are some differences. Hopefully, progress was made with regard to those. It's too soon to tell. The appearances were good, but it ultimately will depend, Bill, on whether progress is made on the ground. If progress is not made, the contentiousness will return, in my judgment.
Well, the problem on the ground is that the writ of the government in Kabul doesn't really extend very far into the country, does it?
Well, I think politically, constitutionally, the government has a very substantial influence all over the country. The Afghan constitution gives the president the right to appoint governors, sub-governors, and the Afghan army and police are much bigger now than they were, let's say, 6-7 years ago, so there is more of a presence. The problem has been the effectiveness of government institutions in terms of dealing with challenges such as corruption, with rule of law, with the terrorists and insurgents. While progress has been made in some areas, in some other areas there has been a decline, a deterioration of the situation. And 10 years on, people are getting a little tired of the conflict,
sure,
both there and here. So
exactly. For the U.S., the problem is the continuing war and the lack of support. 52% in a recent poll of Americans said that the war was not worth fighting.
Right.
And for President Karzai, it's what happens when the Americans leave.
Sure. Well, I think that it is because there is a decrease here in confidence that we know what we are doing, that we are succeeding. There's no question that Afghanistan is important in terms of extremism, in terms of terror, in terms of regional stability. President Obama explained all that very well yesterday again. But the issue is that the American people, I think, don't see the kind of progress that they would like to see 10 years into this conflict. And that's the challenge, whether the two leaders, based on a new division of labor, and they're talking about the new compact or updating the existing compact between the two countries to see who will do what, and based on that perhaps do better than what has happened recently.
But can military force really accomplish anything? We'll have 100,000 troops in there, more or less, in the end of summer, with a drawdown scheduled to begin a year from July. So the military record in Afghanistan of any occupying power has not been good, whether it's the British or the Russians.
Yeah.
I mean, what can we really hope to accomplish militarily that will stand?
Sure. Well, first, of course, our presence there is at least broadly perceived differently in Afghanistan than the Soviet occupation. They know the fear there is not that we're occupying them, broadly speaking, but that we would abandon them. As we did after we helped them against the Soviet. That is the dominant fear. And I think one of the objectives of President Karzai is to get a longer-term commitment from the United States, because this 18-month business next July has made him and a lot of people in the region nervous that that may be the beginning of a disengagement again. And in fact, that has had a negative effect on some of the things where we would like to see more progress, for example, on corruption. Because people are now concerned that the U.S. is going to leave, corruption has increased because people are thinking...
You mean they want to get it while they can?
While they can, so to speak. And that's an unintended consequence of the president's timeline issue, because I'm sure his intentions were in part domestic and in part to encourage President Karzai to do more, but this had this unintended consequence of increasing corruption. So I think that is an issue that needs to be dealt with in the updating of the Strategic Partnership Agreement.
Okay, if the U.S. military has learned anything in the last 30 or 40 years, it is that you can't defeat an indigenous force.
Sure.
That means, doesn't it, eventually that they have to negotiate with the Taliban and come to some kind of accommodation if there is to be any kind of stability?
Sure. Well, military power and the use of military power is an indispensable element of an overall strategy. In Iraq, for example, the application of military power was quite effective, has been against Al-Qaeda there. And I believe that in Afghanistan, against the more extreme elements, the application of military force would still be appropriate. The issue is what balance of force on the ground would produce the best outcome politically in terms of negotiations. Because if the situation is militarily bad from the U.S. and the government point of view, you cannot rely on the Taliban to come to your rescue if their demands will be very high, that the U.S. has to withdraw, the Constitution has to change, the government has to change. So I think in order to get a reconciliation that is more favorable to the values for which the United States went there, to the government, the new Constitution, the situation on the ground has to improve. The Taliban have to come to a view that time is not on their side. There has to be an understanding between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The sanctuary issue in Pakistan has to be dealt with. So there is a role for military, both in terms of going after some of the hostile elements, but it isn't it isn't the total answer for the situation.
And when U.S. troops begin to draw down, it will depend on Afghan troops. And in your experience, can the Afghan army be formed to a point where it is reliable?
No, the challenge is over what time frame, and that's where the president's 18-month or July next year is an issue. Can enough progress be made, both in terms of the security for the Afghans and the weakening of the insurgency and the strengthening of the Afghan forces, where we can begin to withdraw significantly? I think the jury's out on that, but certainly over time, Afghans have had effective security institutions in the past, and there is no reason why they can't have it again.
The president made a point in his press conference with President Karzai of saying that the U.S. will not abandon Afghanistan, that they will remain there to support. He didn't say indefinitely, but that's what it seems. That's what it sounds like.
True. I think that was what President Karzai was looking for, this fear of abandonment that I mentioned before. But the question is whether the president's mix of drawing down militarily starting next July, but remaining engaged politically and economically will work. Because if there is not enough security, if you draw down militarily, you may have the best of intentions economically and politically, it may not be credible in those circumstances. So he may have to, depending on how things develop in the course of the next year, adjust the timeline and will have to come with a more condition-based adjustment in the presence of U.S. forces.
In the meantime, what do you think the chances are that the government will become less corrupt as they move toward this goal of trying to build up Afghan forces?
Well, corruption is extremely important. It's a cancer on the Afghan political system, and it undermines the legitimacy of the order in the eyes of the ordinary people. And I think that one of the issues that is important from our point of view, from the U.S. point of view, to get the Afghan government to move on is this issue. But so far, there hasn't been really any effective action on this issue. And a test for this new friendship or new cordiality on the ground would be whether more effective action will be taken with regard to this issue.
So one would have to conclude, I guess, that success remains a very large question mark.
It is a question mark. I think yesterday and the day before and today, a good start has been made in terms of repairing the relationship, the hurt feelings, soothing, but that you needed to do, clearly. But that's a start. Was necessary but not sufficient. What's important, what will determine the outcome, including the ultimate fate of the relationship, will be what happens on the ground with regard to security, with regard to economic development, with regard to corruption, with regard to rule of law, with regard to relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And those are huge challenges, and I think the time is short.
And how confident are you, as someone who knows the country very well, that these things can happen?
Well, I am concerned whether there's enough time to make these things happen. I think they can happen with time and with a level of appropriate level of effort and commitment. But I just don't know politically whether the time needed will be there, and that's a challenge for President Obama as well as President Karzai.
Ambassador Khalilzad, thank you very much for being with us today. And finally, we're going to take a closer look at the battle in Pennsylvania. Will Senator Arlen Specter lose his seat? He has faced contentious primaries before, but none like this. Our John Dickerson has more with this week's Damned Spot, brought to you by Slate V. Take a look.
Hello and welcome to Damned Spot. I'm John Dickerson. Arlen Specter is in a tough fight in the Pennsylvania Democratic primary, mostly because he doesn't belong there. A 5-term Republican senator, Specter changed his party affiliation last year when it became clear he was going to lose the Republican primary. His opponent, Joe Sestak, a Democrat, isn't letting him forget it.
My change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
For 45 years, Arlen Specter has been a Republican politician.
Arlen Specter is the right man for the United States Senate. I can count on this man. See, that's important. He's a firm ally.
But now,
my change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
Arlen Specter switched parties to save one job. His, not yours.
It's hard to figure out what's more damaging about the ad, Specter's craven self-interest in protecting his hide, or his affiliation with a president Democrats don't like. It gets worse when Democrats learn the footage of George Bush is taken from an ad Specter ran in support of his last candidacy as a Republican.
I'm Arlen Specter, and I approve this message.
Specter has tried to respond by grafting on a new president more popular in Democratic circles.
President Obama and newspapers across Pennsylvania agree. Arlen Specter is the real deal.
I want to say a few things about Arlen Specter. He came to fight for the working men and women of Pennsylvania. And Arlen Specter cast the deciding vote in favor of a Recovery Act that has helped pull us back from the brink. Because you know he's going to fight for you regardless of what the politics are.
I'm Arlen Specter, and I approve this message.
I love you, and I love Arlen Specter.
This isn't working in part because while President Obama may love Arlen Specter and may support his campaign, he's not actually campaigning for him. In an election year where the parties are more divided than ever, there may be one thing they agree on. They don't want Arlen Specter. For Slate V, I'm John Dickerson.
Thank you, John, and thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm Bill Plant. Have a great day.